Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
If no shots are fired at these ships and no shots are fired at us, we're not firing shots. But if we're fired on, we will respond, and we will respond with lethal efficiency.
Tonight, defense in the Strait. As Project Freedom enters its second day, Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasizes that U.S. forces will only strike if fired upon. The question now, how to secure safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz as a fragile Iran ceasefire holds. And clarity for crypto. A bipartisan deal on the Clarity Act is fueling fresh optimism in digital assets. We'll discuss the outlook with Congressman Bryan Steil of Wisconsin live from Mnuchin, and later this hour hear from New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Plus, price for perfection. AMD delivered a blowout forecast, cashing in on surging demand for AI data centers. The industry's momentum is lifting chip makers and the broader market to fresh records. As big tech spending ramps up, the question now, how much further can this trade run? Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, alongside Joe Matthew at the Mnuchin Global Conference in Beverly Hills, California. I'm Kaylee Lines in Washington. And obviously, Joe, here in D.C. and abroad, we are recognizing that it's day 2 of Project Freedom. It is also day 2 of Mnuchin for you out in L.A.
Yeah, that's right. And another day of thinking big thoughts here at the intersection of politics and the economy, Kaylee, with a lot of concern at the same time as some optimism over the news that's been coming out of Iran today. We, of course, started early with our eyes on that Pentagon briefing, which was before dawn out here. And that sense of optimism was carried into the corridors here at Mnuchin and certainly gave the markets a nice lift today. We'll be talking with Congressman Bryan Steil in just a moment about his view on all of this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation. And as we set the scene, let's get the latest on the conflict with Iran. As the White House signaling today that the ceasefire remains in place, helping to boost sentiment, as Joe was alluding to, on Wall Street. The president speaking from the Oval Office earlier, saying Iran should, quote, wave the white flag. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio, briefing the press a short time ago, gave this update.
The operation is over. Epic Fury, as the president notified Congress, we're done with that stage of it. Okay, we're now on to this project of freedom. As far as a negotiation is concerned, I think the president's been clear that part of the negotiation process has to be not just the enrichment, but what happens to this material that's buried deep somewhere that they still have access to if they ever wanted to dig it out. That has to be addressed.
For the latest from the administration, we turn now to Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko, who's joining me here in our Washington bureau. So, Michelle, the argument that we're hearing today is that Operation Epic Fury is off. Project Freedom is on. And in the words of the defense secretary, these are separate and distinct. How separate are they really?
Well, and that's really key, Kaylee, is the language here. You move from an operation, a military effort, to a project, which they're casting as a very defensive humanitarian gesture and effort on the part of the U.S. So you heard that across 3 different briefings today. You heard it from, Secretary Hegseth and General Kane in the morning, and then you heard it from President Trump, and then you heard it this afternoon as we finish, and you played those clips from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, all kind of emphasizing we're in a new phase of this war. Ceasefire, as you mentioned, is not broken, as they've said, even though they're still addressing, these disparate attacks, and including some claims that the U.S. has shot down different small boats that the Iran Navy, as you might call it, still has patrolling through the Strait. So a lot of questions still in Hormuz, but you can see why the markets responded as they did, with stocks up and oil down, because they're hearing this sort of posturing more from a place of calm, at least today, from the administration.
Well, and the President Trump, that is, probably wants there to be calm enough at least that he feels comfortable leaving the country to go to China for his visit with Xi Jinping next week. We heard about him from that today.
That's absolutely right. And that's something we've been watching closely, especially over the last 48 hours, is the language around how do you address these lingering questions about the tensions between the world's 2 largest economies, and Trump and Xi obviously disagreeing around the U.S. efforts in Iran. China has not been shy about saying that over the past many weeks, and they clearly have a stake to play in this, in terms of their their crude imports from the region. So surely they have been pushing for a diplomatic resolution to all this. Trump wants to deliver that, and he wants to deliver it over the next 8 days so he can preserve that meeting. I think you've seen from both sides that they definitely want to keep that summit intact, and we'll see if things can wrap up to the satisfaction of the Chinese to host the president for a big, pomp and circumstance over in Beijing.
Indeed. All right, Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisko, thank you so much, as always. And now let's check back in with Joe at the Mnuchin Global Conference.
All right, Kaylee, thank you so much. Joining us now live here at Mnuchin in Beverly Hills is Congressman Bryan Steil, the Republican from Wisconsin, who serves as chair of the House Administration Committee, also on the House Financial Services Committee, and of course, an important voice on all things crypto as chair of the Crypto Subcommittee. Nice to see you out here in California. Fascinating series of conversations going on about affordability, even as we're surrounded by billionaires here in Beverly Hills, Congressman. When you consider the current state of the economy, the price of gas, oil still in triple digits, arguably a shaky labor market in some parts of the country, would you support interest rate cuts right now?
I want the decision by the Fed to be data-driven, not politically driven. We would all like to see interest rates come down, but maintaining and making sure that we don't allow inflation to rear its ugly head again is going to be absolutely essential.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for the Fed to be data-driven, not driven by politics, with the hope that at some point in the near future we will get rates down.
Do you worry about a corrosive effect of these gas prices? I see in Wisconsin you're at $4.38. Have you seen prices in California? That's a whole story of its own in the $6, $7, $8 range. How long can your constituents pay for this and support their families at the same time?
The sooner oil and gas prices come down, the better for the American people. Obviously, energy costs have a huge impact on inflation. As we look at the positive news, hopefully coming out of the conflict with Iran, the sooner we reach a resolution where Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, is no longer the largest state sponsor of terrorism, that is good for global security. Also will unlock a lot of the oil that's tied up in the Persian Gulf right now. Again, the goal here is to bring down those oil prices, and making sure that we continue our work to unleash American energy is a key component to that.
If that means months to get to the point where those objectives you just listed are met, how do you message that to your constituents? And are they on board with this short-term pain, long-term gain, even if it's not so short-term?
Well, I think a lot of people recognize the importance of the action that President Trump has taken to make sure that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. We would all love Iran to be part of the broader productive actor on the global stage. Iran's not willing to do that, but preventing them from having a nuclear weapon is absolutely essential. I think broadly the American people understand the importance of that. In the period of time while we still are in this ceasefire, hopefully that ceasefire holds. Hopefully we can unlock the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz sooner rather than later. But I do think there is some anxiety as people look at high oil prices and high gas prices from here in California to my home state of Wisconsin.
We could start seeing physical shortages, we're told, in the coming days or months. Certainly in other countries, at some point, it's going to impact prices here in the global market. And just to get back to the view from the Fed and from your perch on the House Financial Services Committee, are you looking at that as an inflationary event? Is it a one-time shock? What can our economy endure here?
Well, the goal here is to bring back energy prices and bring them down. The good news is a lot of work has been done about unleashing American energy. The United States is a net exporter, and obviously global demand due to supply constraints in the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz is having impacts here in the United States. We don't face the same level of supply concerns that other countries do because we're not as dependent directly on that oil, although it's having a huge impact on price. Continuing our work to unleash American energy is going to be even more important than it was before, with the goal of the positive news that the ceasefire is holding, with the hope that that truly unlocks the oil that's not moving through the Strait currently.
Congressman, you're speaking about tokenization today here at Mnuchin. I know you delivered a keynote a short time ago, and I'd love to ask you about the way forward when it comes to clarity. There's been a lot of optimism from Republicans and Democrats who've joined us here today that this will be done not only before the end of the year, but potentially passed and signed into law by the 4th of July. Is that realistic?
I think it's realistic, it's possible, and we need to get it done. Okay. The House passed clarity market structure legislation in crypto now almost 9 months ago in overwhelming fashion. About 2/3 of the entire United States House of Representatives were in support of it. We're watching the Senate in some ways struggle in renegotiating stablecoin legislation and discussing yield and what rewards would look like. It seems like there is a compromise at the table that the Senate can move forward on. I think that opens up an opportunity to unlock clarity and to move forward on market structure legislation. I'm optimistic. Proof will be in the pudding. The Senate never moves as fast as those of us in the House would like. But let's hope the Senate is able to move this forward and get this signed into law.
Well, what are you hearing from community banks, for instance, in Wisconsin about this idea of stablecoin yield? Are they satisfied with the deal that's been offered?
I think everybody wants something, and this is about making sure that we don't let perfection
so
be
everyone
the
also
enemy.
is disappointed in the end. That's the spirit of what we're discussing.
Right, you don't want to allow perfection to be the enemy of the good. I think there's recognition that making sure we have a regulatory regime for U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins is absolutely essential. Previously, folks who are interested in the space were largely engaged offshore. That's not good from a consumer protection standpoint. The bill that passed, Genius, provides some of the most important consumer protections in the stablecoin space that we have ever seen. This is an opportunity to make sure we're putting forward legislation that's protecting American consumers, while at the same time allowing innovation and development to occur in the United States so that we're out-competing the rest of the globe.
Well, you've become a real face of this on a policy level in Washington. You and your chairman, French Hill, are really have been on the outer edge of this debate. Now that it's in the hands of the Senate, is there a scenario in which they make changes you cannot accept in the House?
Well, we're engaged in the negotiations with our colleagues in the Senate. And so this is an open dialogue between those of us at the forefront of policy to make sure that the adjustments and changes in the Senate bill are both palatable to those of us in the House. It's my hope that we don't have a problem on the back end, as you just discussed. It's my hope that the resolution that we see in the Senate-passed bill is then teed up for quick passage in the House to be signed into law.
I want to get you quickly on reconciliation. You saw Chuck Grassley dropped a $78 billion skinny reconciliation bill. It also includes ballroom security and an enhancement in funding for the Secret Service. Would that come through your admin committee? Is that something you want to see?
It won't come through admin, but it will come through, obviously, through the House.
Yes.
I think there's a broad recognition of the need to make sure that we're protecting all elected officials, members of the public, but in particular, the President of the United States. We've seen over the past few years—
Three times, Congressman.
Not only that, but as we've seen drone technology in Ukraine, first-person view drones that are connected through cables back, making sure that the President is safe, in particular while in the White House. We just saw an incident yesterday with an armed individual, individuals getting harmed. I think broadly as a society, we recognize the importance of making sure that everyone's safe, but in particular, the Commander-in-Chief himself is safe. And so I think this type of investment actually has real merit.
Understood. Surrounded by an impressive level of security this week at Mnuchin as well, which is noteworthy. Congressman, it's great to see you out here in Beverly Hills. Thank you for joining us, as always, on Bloomberg. Republican Bryan Steil of Wisconsin with us live at Mnuchin. Kaylee, let's get it back to you in Washington.
Well, Joe, great conversation. Thank you so much. And we also want to shift the focus to what happened on Wall Street today as stocks closed at fresh records again, driven in part by a rally in chip stocks, with the SOX index also closing at a new all-time high. And after the close, we got results from chipmaker AMD as well as Supermicro Computer, both of which gave upbeat forecasts that are lifting shares by about 6% and 18% respectively in the post-market. So joining us now with the details for a special edition of Power Moves is Bloomberg's Michael Shepard. So clearly for both of these companies I just mentioned, benefiting in a big way from the AI demand.
Absolutely, there's no question. And if there were any doubt about the sustainability of this AI trade and the demand for all that infrastructure that each company is producing, it was erased today. AMD gave a forecast that was well above estimates for the coming quarter. Came in at $11.2 billion. Sales have been projected at $10.5 billion, according to the consensus of analyst survey by Bloomberg. And likewise for Supermicro Computer, their projections for earnings and for sales all came in well ahead of what had been projected beforehand. And for them in particular, this removed perhaps some of the shadow of the indictment of a co-founder and two others associated with the company for allegedly violating U.S. export control regimes. And the company, of course, has denied any wrongdoing in that case. Taken together, the AMD results and Supermicro's really do point to how the trade in this is not only being driven by the big hyperscalers, the hyperscalers' demand for infrastructure with the CapEx promises that we saw last week from the four biggest publicly traded companies, Amazon, Meta, Google, Microsoft, pledging to up their capex for next year, through the end of the year, to $725 billion, really indicates that there's a lot of strength in this for the infrastructure makers.
So we may see this rally continuing tomorrow, perhaps, at least if the after-hours trade is any indication. But I want to talk about what else was driving the rally in chip makers today specifically. Bloomberg reporting that Apple is looking to diversify away from TSMC, maybe looking at Samsung and Intel to make some of its processors, at least here in the U.S. Walk us through that.
Well, in a way, Kaylee, this is an offshoot of that pressure from the AI boom. They simply can't get enough chips for the devices that they try to sell to consumers like you and me, for the iPhones and the Macs. The demand to make the processors for the data centers that are going up across the country and around the world is so great that it is harder and harder to get those chips for the things that they would like to sell to consumers. And that was something that outgoing Apple CEO Tim Cook acknowledged together with executives on their earnings call last week. And this will be a way for them to answer that demand question, but also perhaps kill two birds with one stone. This would very much be good news for President Donald Trump, as well as the previous administration. They've each tried to boost domestic production of chips, and that is what they're talking about here, trying to turn to Intel for production here on U.S. soil, as well as production perhaps at a Samsung plant in Texas that is being built. This would, of course, Kaylee, be a leap of faith for Apple. For years, they have depended on Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing for most of the chips that go into their devices. And yet, necessity is the mother of invention. And with Intel really trying to push this turnaround under new CEO Lip-Bu Tan, they are seeing an opportunity. And they have held discussions on a preliminary basis with Intel for this. And that, too, in a way, also would be a win for the Trump administration, thinking back on this big investment that they have pledged to make.
That stake certainly went up in value today. Intel rose about 13%. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, thank you so much, as always. And coming up, a live conversation from the Mnuchin Global Conference with Javier Garcia of World Central Kitchen about the humanitarian impact of the U.S.-Iran conflict. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This is a temporary mission for us. As I've said before, the world needs this waterway a lot more than we do. We're stabilizing the situation so commerce can flow again, but we expect the world to step up. At the appropriate time and soon, we will hand responsibility back to you.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew, live at the Mnuchin Global Conference underway right now in Beverly Hills. That, of course, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth earlier today talking with reporters about the state of the conflict with Iran, saying other nations will soon be given responsibility over the Strait of Hormuz, despite the tug of war over that critical passageway that is causing a surge in oil prices and a humanitarian crisis in the region. Joining us now live here at the Mnuchin Global Conference is Javier Garcia, the CEO of the World Central Kitchen. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us on Bloomberg TV and Radio. You're currently operating in Gaza, where you are serving, I believe, 1 million meals a day by your own metric. You've been in Ukraine since the beginning of the war.
Correct.
Will you be in Iran next?
We will if we could. Right now, it's something we have explored, but unfortunately, we haven't found a way to partner to respond to Iran. But we feed everywhere, so
yes,
it's something that we would love to.
So it's inevitable. Are you in contact with any member of the regime, anyone in the Iranian government?
No, we usually don't talk to governments. We talk to the people directly, and that's how we're feeding in Gaza, in Israel as well, in Ukraine. So we don't go through connections with government. We talk directly to communities.
I see. Talk to us about what is happening in Gaza, because you know it's fallen off the front page, so to speak, in this country. Certainly with the war in Iran, it has taken our attention away from a massive humanitarian crisis. 80% of the infrastructure is still gone.
Right.
I was struck to learn that Israel is still not allowing building supplies into Gaza, even in the form of prefab housing. Describe what's happening on the ground right now.
Well, our organization is doing what we can to feed the people in Gaza. It's what's going on in Gaza. About 80% of the infrastructure are gone. people are living on tents, people don't have the means to cook, and people don't have the ingredients to cook.
What is the level of starvation that you're facing?
We to give you a little bit the scope of how many meals we're cooking.
Yes.
Last March, we reached 1 million meals a day. We have done over 350 million meals over the last 2 years. So that gives you an idea of the level of desperation and need that the people of Gaza have, and we don't have a source of income. It's not only that there is no food, even when there is some food available in the local markets for the little food that can get in, people don't have jobs, people don't have income, so there is no resources for them to even buy on those local markets. So the dependency is still there, and because of that, we are needed to be doing what we're doing at the level and the scale that we're doing it.
Are you provided security by Israel? How are you able to operate? You have 2,000 people there, I believe.
Yeah, we're close to 2,000 locals, Gazans. This is the one thing that makes us more the proudest of the operation is Gazans feeding Gazans.
Understood.
We coordinate.
Is that typically your model? You want local people on the ground?
Correct. We are a trainer approach. We go in, we train, we build capacity, and we leave that capacity behind us. But we coordinate closely with on security with Israel. And again, but it's a local team, Gazans feeding Gazans, and that's a modality that helps us being able to do what we do in an environment as complex as Gaza.
There's a terrible rodent infestation in Gaza to the point where people are being attacked while they're sleeping. Javier, how do you operate in an environment where you're serving food?
Extremely challenging. Extremely challenging, not only on that side, on the production. Again, we are cooking every day, hot meals from scratch, and fresh vegetables, protein. The challenges are many, shouldn't be that hard. But again, our local team is very resilient and committed to feeding themselves, and that, there's any little problem that they have, any big problem that they have, they always find a way around to solve it.
So what brings you to Mnuchin? I am so struck walking around here the last couple of days to see the diversity of attendees. Are you here to secure funding? Have you been well received by the elite in Beverly Hills?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I think this is the idea we've been recently talking about the humanitarian sectors on crisis. I think this idea that the humanitarian work is charity. I think we are figured out that we live in an economy that's unique to everything is interconnected. Something happening in Gaza have an immediate impact on our food costs, on our fuel costs in here at home. Something happening in Ukraine have an immediate impact on the food costs in Europe. So it is an investment on the best return on the investment of capital, helping people at the source where the problem is. I think that's a case that we can make on a forum like this one, that this is not charity, it's a shared responsibility. It is a good investment of capital to put it where the problem is there so it doesn't get to where we are today.
Right. It's great to hear you articulate that, and I appreciate your joining us. Thanks for the work that you're doing, and thanks for being with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. Javier Garcia is CEO at the World Central Kitchen. Kaylee, we talk about capitalism all day here on Bloomberg, and it's a very important message that I'm glad we all get to hear as well.
Yeah, indeed. Great conversation, Joe, as we consider as well the still ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz impacting fertilizer availability, something that could fuel even more hunger throughout the world, which the United Nations has indeed warned about. They've actually suggested the number ultimately could eclipse the hunger level seen after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a major breadbasket in 2022. They said food insecurity could reach 363 million people. Pretty incredible stuff. So we'll continue that conversation and others here on Balance of Power. Just ahead, my conversation with Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York about her push for crypto legislation. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have a great compromise in the text in the Senate Banking Committee, and we're very hopeful that we'll see a markup in the committee this coming month and hopefully get this on the floor in the Senate and then over in the House in the next couple months. And hopefully, when we ring in Independence Day for the nation's 250th, we'll also be signing or sending a bill to the president's desk for crypto.
I didn't think you'd answer that question. So you actually have a timeline. You think this is done by July 4th?
I hope so. Okay. I don't have, that. Don't quote me on it, but I do think we can hopefully get this across the line. We've got a lot of great stakeholders, and this is a priority of the president.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I think we will quote him on that. Alongside Kayleigh Lyons in Washington, I'm Joe Matthew, live at the Mnuchin Global Conference in Beverly Hills. That was the chair of the CFTC, Michael Selig, yesterday on this program, sharing when he expects crypto market structure legislation to be passed in the U.S. Senate.
And, Joe, that's a conversation I continued today as I spoke with Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York about the bill's prospects from the Solana Accelerate event, Solana's flagship U.S. event in Miami, being held alongside CoinDesk Consensus Conference. And I began asking her about whether the Clarity Act is passable now that there's been an agreement on that language around stablecoin yield. Listen.
I do. I think it's on track, and I'm optimistic. We're still putting to bed a few items. We're trying to make sure there's ways to crack down on illicit finance and terrorism financing. And we're still working on an ethics provision to make sure no members of Congress, the president, vice president, any senior administration official can't be an issuer of a cryptocurrency or meme coin or promote it or advocate for it in any way. So that one provision is key to getting the Democratic support that we have been building, and I'm optimistic that we will reach an agreement on that in advance of the markup for the Banking Committee, which should happen in the next 2 weeks.
So what could the timeline be realistically for ultimate passage, do you think, assuming it can advance out of committee?
So my hope is that we have a successful Banking Committee markup, and these last few provisions are included in the agreement. And once that is completed, we will work with the Agriculture Committee and try to merge the banking and agriculture draft. The Agriculture Committee markup, however, was partisan, and so there were a lot of agreed upon bipartisan ideas before that in an earlier draft that we're going to try to reintegrate back into the final version. So those negotiations are going to be very important. They may take several weeks to do. But my hope is we can do those negotiations as soon as banking's finished, spend 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 if needed, on those negotiations, merge the bill, and hopefully get that bill to the floor.
Well, and I want to go back to the ethics concerns you were mentioning, Senator. Is at Consensus in Miami this week, the president's sons, Eric Trump, Don Jr., they are both featured speakers, and I wonder to what extent is still the involvement directly of the president's family in this space that is acting as kind of an impediment to bipartisan progress.
Well, you know, those are business interests of Trump family members. Our legislation will just prohibit the principals from being an issuer or a promoter of these cryptocurrencies or meme coins or stable coins. We just don't want people who are in positions of authority to be able to make money on the side, off the backs of the American people, based on non-public information. So it's very important that these basic ethics rules apply to people in positions of power. And I think this is something that we can get the White House to agree to. I think they should not ultimately be an impediment on this. And I'm hoping that we can get those negotiations done in the next couple of weeks. And I'd really like them to be done in advance of the Banking Committee markup.
Well, we'll be continuing to watch that closely. Another narrative we're tracking closely here at Bloomberg is artificial intelligence and how it's impacting the labor market. Coinbase, which is a sponsor of the Consensus Conference, obviously announced today that it's going to be reducing its workforce by 14%. And Brian Armstrong, the CEO, says in large part that is due to artificial intelligence. And I wonder from a policymaking perspective, if you think a response is going to be required from a policy standpoint to kind of ensure the labor market against what could be a material softening because of AI, as we see other tech companies, because they're going to spend so much CapEx developing that technology, also looking to reduce their headcount, be it Meta or other companies.
Yes. So when we complete our work on market structure for cryptocurrency and blockchain, I am going to start working on a framework for AI. And the largest question that is going to inform that framework is how do you guarantee the future of work? How do you make sure you have a vision for this country where people who need to be trained, need to be have access to new markets, can do jobs that they're excited about, and make sure that if there is job loss related to AI, that we reform our education system, build upon our education system so that people, young people, and even mid-career people can get employed in areas they want to be employed and have the training to do so. And that's going to have to be a conversation that is part of when you regulate AI, that hopefully they can be a cornerstone investor into this vision of education and an economy where people can have that guarantee of a job that allows them to not only have just the human dignity of making an impact on society, but also to be able to provide for their families. And I think that's part of the American dream, and that will be part of any regulation we do in the AI space, how we look at the future of work and how you make that work with a framework for AI regulation.
And Senator, if we could switch gears a bit, as you obviously also sit on the Armed Services Committee, I'd like to ask you about Iran, as there is now this Project Freedom trying to ensure, once again, free transit through the Strait of Hormuz that the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said today is separate and distinct from the combat operations. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this is fundamentally a rescue mission for more than 20,000 sailors and workers on commercial vessels who are stranded right now. Do you see this as separate from activity that would require congressional authorization?
No, it's not separate at all. And right now, the American people are asking a very direct question. This is an illegal, unauthorized war. And the American people want to know why President Trump is spending $1 billion a day on a war they don't want, instead of getting their grocery costs down, getting their housing costs down, and getting their fuel costs down. And the Strait of Hormuz issue is one of the main drivers of high costs of gasoline to fill our tanks to take our kids to school, diesel to fill truckers' tanks so they can bring goods across America, and fuel costs for heating and for air conditioning across the country. These costs are fundamental to the American economy and fundamental to American families. And so they're just asking, at what cost is this war, this illegal, unauthorized war, going to continue to be waged without the support of the American people? They would rather President Trump spend that billions of dollars a day guaranteeing health care for their families and their neighbors, or getting the cost of groceries or housing down.
Are you hearing behind closed doors, Senator, from your Republican colleagues that something may change in the near future in terms of their willingness to support something like a war powers vote or an authorization of use of military force? Are we approaching a turning point?
I certainly hope so, because when I'm in New York State, New Yorkers are furious at the president right now. They are so frustrated that he's not come to the American people, that he is spending $25 billion so far, is set to ask for another $200 billion, all while their gas prices are going up. And so I know Republicans are hearing the same things from their constituents in their states. So because of that, I believe they will come to the table and try to hold this administration at some point accountable for a very unpopular war that isn't authorized and the American people don't support. 3 in 5 Americans are against this war today, and that's because they're paying for it at the pump, and they've been shown no reason why we had to engage in this war, and that there was no risk to the American people that President Trump had to protect them from.
Well, and it's those higher prices at the pump that now seem to be fueling a building narrative that Democrats may have a better chance of flipping the Senate blue once again in the midterms. That, of course, is what you're charged with, chairing the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. I just wonder, as you look across this widening map, take Iowa, where the vice president is today, and where there's talk that Democrats may actually stand a chance, something we haven't seen in 18 years, or Texas, or Alaska, or Maine. It takes money. You have to pay to play in all those different places. So I'm wondering how you're approaching it strategically and financially, this wider map.
Yeah, so right now we have a map of 11 states, and the reason why we have so many states that could go from red to blue is because of the climate that President Trump has created with his toxic policies. He promised that he wasn't going to get involved in wars. He promised to get grocery and housing costs down, and he's done everything but. We now are engaged in at least 2 wars, one with Venezuela and one with Iran, both illegal, both unauthorized. He's done nothing to bring cost of groceries and housing down. The cost at the pump continues to rise because of the war in Iran. And so President Trump is very unpopular right now, and the Republicans that are aiding and abetting him, not standing up to him, not demanding groceries and housing costs come down, they're going to be held accountable at the ballot box. And so we have talented candidates running in red and purple states all across the country right now. And so we have a few states we are defending, and then we have 8 states that are now in play because of President Trump's toxic policies.
And speaking of the president's policies, finally, Senator, he obviously has a big push toward building this new ballroom at the White House. And according to the reconciliation text that we saw released last night from Senator Grassley, there's $1 billion allotted in there for Secret Service, specifically as it relates to the ballroom. Does that make this ultimately a done deal? Is there anything Democrats can do to stop that construction, knowing reconciliation is by nature a partisan process?
So what Democrats are doing is talking to their constituents about what matters to them. And I can tell you, in New York State, they do not want President Trump spending their tax dollars on a ballroom that we don't need. They want President Trump to be focused on the small businesses, the family farms, getting these chaotic tariffs down, making sure that we get the cost of gasoline and fuel down, making sure he's actually focused on their grocery bills and their heating bills and their medical bills. The fact that he's spending $25 billion on a war instead of restoring Medicaid to millions of people is frankly an outrage. And so I do think we're going to flip the Senate and the House in November, and people are going to express their concerns with President Trump by voting differently and voting for Democrats in a lot of red and purple places.
That was Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York speaking with me earlier today on Bloomberg. And coming up, the SEC officially proposing today to allow for semi-annual reporting. And we got real-time reaction from former Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin at Mnuchin. That conversation is next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew, live at the Mnuchin Global Conference underway right now in Beverly Hills, California. Spent some time today out here at Mnuchin with Steven Mnuchin, of course, the former Treasury Secretary in President Trump's first term. He's now founder, managing partner at Liberty Strategic Capital. And right when we sat down, news broke, went red on the terminal, and got his reaction to the SEC's proposal to now allow for semi-annual reporting. Listen.
I support the proposal. I think there's too many companies that are too focused on quarterly earnings and whether they miss or beat expectations, analysts' expectations. So I think the idea of giving companies the option of whether they want to do quarterly or semi-annual is a good thing. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine there are a number of companies, particularly companies that are growing, that are still going to be interested in showing quarterly earnings and showing their progress through the year. But I think giving companies the option is a very good idea.
Does it do anything to kind of the global perspective from investors about how the U.S. market is kind of the gold standard, so transparent because of those quarterly reports and so much more, and some of the rules and regulations that really govern our companies here?
Well, there's no question. The U.S. is the gold standard for companies to be listed. It's the most liquid market in the world. It's the largest and the largest economy. And I think giving companies the options, I think, will continue to have transparency.
Do you think most of them will still stick to quarterly reporting?
My guess is some will switch and some won't. I mean, as I said, if you're a growth company, you have every reason to want to show the growth every quarter. If you're a company that's in turnaround and things are improving, you're going to want to show it. On the other hand, there are plenty of companies where, you know, they're focused on a long-term transition, and I think giving them an option is a good thing.
You could pretty quickly see two classes of companies when it comes to reporting season,
which is interesting. Mess up our world a little bit, but that's okay.
Your after-hour sessions are going to feel really different, Carol. So I'd love to hear from you on this market as a whole and the psychology that's confounding a lot of us. As we mentioned already, it's rally time, Mr. Secretary. Oil prices are lower again today after the defense secretary suggested that this effort in the Strait would not go on forever. That's all you need, and we're back to buying on Wall Street. Is this getting a little toppy, or can you rationalize what you're seeing?
I think there's two things that are going on in the market. One is that you have very large CapEx spending and very large growth around AI, around data centers, around the cloud. And that, to me, we are still in the early innings of this transition. There's no question that AI is going to impact almost every business that we touch. And that's something that's going to be a very positive way, but there's also going to be job issues and job implications on that. Yeah. The second thing we have going on is the U.S. is the destination of where people want to invest. Europe's economy is underperforming. People are concerned about what's going on in Europe. So the flow of funds into the U.S. dollar, in particular into U.S. equities, is still very strong. As I like to say, if you can take a 10-year horizon, there's no better place than buying S&P 500s. If you're day trading, that's a little bit of a different issue, trying to predict the short-term markets.
You can find our full conversation with Stephen Mnuchin, the former Treasury Secretary in President Trump's first term, online or on the terminal. And thanks to Bloomberg's Carol Nasser for taking part in that conversation. Let's check back in with Kayleigh Lyons in Washington. Kayleigh?
All right, Joe, joining me now as our political panel this evening, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic strategist Adam Hodge is with me, managing director at Bully Pulpit International, alongside Republican strategist Leslie Shedd, founder of Rising Communications. Welcome to you both. I want to begin with the conflict, or perhaps not conflict as the administration is characterizing it now, with the ceasefire with Iran that they say is being maintained. They're making the case, Leslie, that Project Freedom, to ensure free maritime navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, is separate and distinct from the combat operations, which they now have declared are over. Is the electorate likely to see it that way when we still have high gas prices and thousands of troops in theater?
Well, I think what you're talking about is whether or not the electorate would support this, right? That's a very different conversation than the argument that they're having right now about whether or not hostilities are still going on. Hostilities are not going on. The United States is trying to ensure safe passageway of an international waterway, right? That is the number one focus right now. They are not attacking proactively. They are simply trying to defend themselves and allow ships to freely pass through. And I think that people will be very supportive of that. They understand that the problem is that we can't get ships through the Strait because Iran has launched this global war against every other country by closing the Strait down, and they want to try to see it get reopened. I think it's great that the president's trying to do this.
The problem is, of course, Adam, that the Strait wasn't closed before they launched Operation Epic Fury.
I mean, how dumb do they think the American people are? It's laughable. As you just said, there would be no blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. There would be drones or speedboats attacking tankers in the Strait of Hormuz if we had not proactively and preemptively launched this war over 66 days ago. And look, taxpayers now, American people, are spending $1 billion more a day for gas than they were when the war started. $4.48 a gallon. That's a huge spike over where it was just a couple months ago. And what you heard today from the president, from Marco Rubio, is still no clear plan for what they actually want to achieve. And so one day it's the nuclear dust, one day it's their missiles, one day it's the humanitarian crisis. You just can't get a straight message out of the president, out of this White House. And that's why you've seen the president's popularity tank, and that's why it's weighing on so many of the members who are running for re-election and opening up so many of these Senate seats for Democrats to win in November.
Well, Adam mentions Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He was at the podium in the briefing room.
He did great
today,
right?
Fielding another job for the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. Now he's acting as a press secretary, at least for the day, too. But it was interesting to see him there as J.D. Vance first voted in the Ohio primary today, and then he made tracks to Iowa, where he's campaigning alongside Zach Nunn and others with these races that look like they could be hotly contested in Iowa. Is this not a safely red state any longer?
These Iowa seats have always been hotly contested. I think Marionette Miller-Meeks won her seat by something like 300 votes last time around. Same thing with Zach Nunn. He's in Iowa because he cares about Iowa. He wants to make sure that we have these great U.S. Congress people return, and hopefully that we get Ashley Hinson in the Senate, who is just a fantastic Republican woman.
Well, and that Senate seat in question, knowing that Iowa hasn't elected a Democrat to the United States Senate in 18 years, Adam, it does seem that your party is thinking there might be some hope there, and not just there, in other states like Texas, too. On Texas, we did get some new polling out from the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston on the Republicans still in that race and the runoff later this month. Likely runoff voters backing Ken Paxton, 48%, to the incumbent Senator John Cornyn's 45%. How do you read that in terms of assessing the odds of the Democrat James Tallarico here?
I mean, it gets Democrats excited, to be honest. The chance to run against Ken Paxton would be a dream. He is a toxic candidate who was nearly expelled from the Texas Senate, who has a whole bunch of scandals and corruption scandals dogging him. And they're spending millions and millions of dollars in this primary while James Tallarico was just rolling in the dough and going out and talking to voters across the state of Texas. And again, the fact that we are talking about potential flips in Texas, in Iowa, that Ohio is back on the map, that Maine is a real shot for Democrats. It's going to be hard, but I could not believe, if you had asked me a year ago, that we'd be sitting here today talking about the U.S. Senate being in play. And then it's down to two main things: Donald Trump's unpopularity and the fact that costs keep going up and the Republicans are totally distracted from solving that problem. Instead, they're going to give $1 billion to a ballroom so the president can throw more fancy parties. That is a recipe for disaster, and it keeps giving Democrats more ammunition to try to take back both houses of Congress in just 6 months.
Well, and of course, President Trump still hasn't endorsed either Paxton or Cornyn, and I wonder how far that endorsement or lack thereof could go and how far the president is able to influence these elections across the country anymore. Perhaps we're going to get a taste of that today, Leslie, in Indiana, where he, of course, has actively campaigned to oust these 8 state senators who didn't go along with his redistricting effort. He called them on Truth Social today rhinos. He says there's great patriots running against them. What will you be looking for in these results? Does he need to have all 8 ousted in order to declare victory?
Well, first of all, just on the Texas race, look, I love the media's obsession with this idea that somehow a Democrat is going to win the ruby red state of Texas, right? It makes Democrats waste tens of millions of dollars in the state, and every year they get trounced. So whoever wins the primary in Texas, 100% is going to be the next United States senator from Texas. Okay. There's just no doubt, but I love it. Please, keep coming.
I'll take that
Spend
bet.
that money in Texas. Absolutely, 100%. When it comes to Indiana, first of all, most people don't know what redistricting is. They're not really tracking it. It's not some kind of a galvanizing issue. I think if the president doesn't sweep every single one of these elections, that it in no way is some kind of an indication of his, hold over the Republican Party. He still has something like 85-90% support of the Republican Party. We'll see what happens tonight. I imagine he will win most, if not all of them. But again, I don't think that is a good indication for, where he stands with the party.
All right, we'll leave it there. Leslie Shedd, that is, and Adam Hodge, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Joe, we'll be tracking those results in Indiana and in the Ohio primaries today, tomorrow on Balance of Power. And you're going to have more coverage coming up on day 3 of Mnuchin tomorrow as well.
That's right. We'll be doing the early edition of Balance of Power from here at the Beverly Hilton tomorrow with another range of voices, including John Hope Bryan is going to be part of our conversation, Kaylee. And I know that you're going to be continuing to carry the bead in Washington. I think everyone must be going out here. All the Lamborghinis and fancy cars are pulling up in front of the hotel.
Yeah, you going to go hitch a ride, Joe? Have fun. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.